have the pleasure of, was that really loud?
No.
Yeah, it got really loud. Of moderating this conversation with these two women who I've gotten to know really quite well over the last year. We've worked together quite a lot, so it's a real delight to be able to sit up here and have a conversation with the two of them around really creating a research strategy. And I think it's interesting, there were a couple of comments in the opening session that really teed this up very well. I don't know if the two of you felt the same thing, listening first to Charlene and then to Chris and Nicole. But, Charlene talked about kind of her own journey with her daughter and starting to become first involved in advocacy and kind of making some decisions around where to go and what to do as an organization. And then in particular, what struck me with Chris was that question. So the question that she took toward the end around, well, our organization is trying to decide, do we really put our resources into a registry or do we put our resources into a natural history study? Which would you do? And I think that's something that resonates with the three of us a lot, that we hear this a lot from patient advocates and advocacy organizations, that you get all kinds of kind of advice, right? And some of it quite conflicting advice, and you can't do it all. None of us can do it all. And not only do you not have the bandwidth to do it all, but not the financial resources to do it all. So I think this is really important. It's really, really important overall that all patient advocacy organizations have some sort of a research strategy. And so we're going to share a little bit about how we've been doing that kind of hand in hand. So first, Rachel, it would be great if you could talk just a little bit about your own background and perspective in industry, and from the perspective of somebody working in industry on really rare diseases and thinking about rare disease drug development, why do you see it as important to do this kind of work hand in hand with patient advocacy organizations? And what do you think are sort of the big messages that they should know about taking this on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I'm a neuroscientist by training. After an academic postdoc, I joined the industry. I worked at big pharmaceutical companies as well as small biotechs. Most recently, I led a team doing research at BridgeBio, which is a biotech studying rare diseases. For me, always being in the early drug discovery and development part of industry, that's my day job, is sort of figuring out, okay, what is the biology that we know about a given disease with a huge amount of unmet need? What are the steps that we need to take to be able to make a medicine and really bring this all the way into the clinic? In rare disease, it's even tougher because often we don't know everything that we need to know about a rare disease because it's obviously rare. So, for us, you talk to academics, you talk to clinicians, you talk to caregivers, you get three different answers about, what is the key unmet need, what are the really problematic symptoms and manifestations of disease, et cetera. The other thing that I would see is patient advocacy groups spending a lot of time and energy raising money and then giving it to researchers, but not really knowing where to give it and what was important. Does everybody need an animal model? Does everybody need this or that? And so, having that knowledge of what it actually takes, it's a privilege and a responsibility of mine then to give that back and form that ecosystem that we talk about so often between industry, academia, and patient advocates.
Great. Yeah, I think that perspective is super important, that it's not just that patient advocates need their own research strategy and roadmap to make the best use of their resources, but also to know that that's really critical to gaining kind of interest from the biotech companies, right? And helping to de-risk investment from a therapy developer.
Absolutely. When we're thinking about which new projects to start, it's what kind of information do we have and how solid is that information? And the less information we have, the riskier it is and the less likely that we're going to take it on. And so, for each of the, and maybe I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but for this research readiness roadmap, it's not a one-size-fits-all for all indications that we are trying to help people understand here. It's really for that indication, what is the critical gap and how do you prioritize funding the research that will fill that gap that will get you closest to a therapeutic? What is the therapeutic window? What is realistic in the short term? And then what is more of a long-term hope? And it's trying to help patient advocacy groups put all of that into perspective, really. Because even though you should, and it was great to hear in the warm-up, that everybody is getting involved in the science, you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. And we should be able to do a better job collectively of bringing information together to move things faster. Drug development takes a long enough time as it is. If everybody has to start from scratch, we're not doing a good job. We need to do better.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to Debbie, because Debbie, at the UPenn Orphan Disease Center, I've become aware of programs that your organization has put in place to try to really create reproducible methods of working together with patient advocacy organizations to help move them forward. So can you talk a little bit about that work?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the director of the Jumpstart program at the Orphan Disease Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And before I answer that, the comment that I heard from Chris this morning was, we used to raise all these millions of dollars and just donate to a lab, right? And so we're trying to not do that.
Yes.
And that's something that's what we do. So one of the things that we do is that we make sure that hard-earned money that you guys have put together in the race in all these many ways go to the right scientists. So we do this through things like the $1 Million Bike Ride, which is our event that we put together, which the event itself is not just it's great. It's a great event. It's a big bike ride where we raise a lot of money. But the important part of it is that we put together. Is that too loud? Am I okay? I like an echo. We put together grant programs. So we actually offer the service of creating the RFA, putting together the program, and then actually dispersing the fundings to the right people. We do the reviews, they're blind reviews. So this is a program that helps you make sure that the money goes where the gaps are, which is what Rachel mentions. We want to make sure that we understand every disease is different and they're at a different stage, and we want to make sure where those gaps are so that money that was raised can go to the right scientist. And we do that as well through the Jumpstart program. We do that in a little bit of a larger way because we start with think tanks. So we start with the scientific meetings, in which we sit together all the important people in the room. And we talk about the background of the disease, what is the biology that is well known, what are the things that need to happen for a pharmaceutical company to take over this. And then once we understand the landscape, then we can go ahead with the grant program. And that's something and we'll talk about this, that we're trying to expand and use some of the tools of the things that we do together with Global Genes and trying to do this in a larger scale. But that's some of the things that we do for the foundations.
Yeah, so I think to make that really concrete for people in the room, since I've been working with you long enough to understand some of the programs offered, I think it's really interesting that you do have in these two different programs, one that's sort of more short-term goals and one that's a little bit longer-term goals.
Oh, absolutely. So the $1 Million Bike Ride, we are with a group for a year. The grants are short pilot grants. When we work with the Jumpstart grants that we do, they are a little bit of a long-term adventure together. Because we do start by looking at who are the scientists, who are the researchers, who are the patients, what do we need at this point. And then from then we start looking at the science. We actually do a lot of research about what's needed. We talk to the scientists, and then we come up with that research roadmap. That then after that we make sure that we fund the correct people. So it's a partnership that lasts a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. I think I heard that too, what Chris said about how when you raise all this money and then you just hand it over to a researcher and you're sort of hands off and you don't know what's going to happen to it. I think we all heard her point about accountability, but the other point that I heard, and I suspect that you both heard in that was sort of an undercurrent of that, is also like, is that the right research to be funding?
Right.
I think that gets at a lot of the core of what we've been trying to develop together. In addition to the work that I've done a little bit more on the kind of clinician side in clinical genetics and rare disease. I also spent 10 years on the board of directors of a small nonprofit dedicated to a rare disease. And I know that we were guilty of that. We were guilty of like, here's this one researcher who we really believe in, who's done a lot of great work, and we just continue to fund him year after year. And he's great, and his research was great, but I feel confident now, having done this work together that we've been doing, that if we had done this work of really laying out what is the entire landscape of all the research that's been done in this condition, how does that landscape really compare with what's needed to get us to a clinical trial? What are the gaps? I don't think his research would have fallen into one of the gaps, right? And so I think also having an external partner can help in kind of taking a step back and having the ability to look more holistically at the problem, but also in taking a little bit of that relationship out. Right?
And I'll tell you more that I think that the parents' organizations have gotten very savvy, so they know this. But I think there's a lot of guilt, as in, like I've been working with this scientist for so long. Like they know all of the patients, but we love him so much. But then they come to us and be like, can you please tell them no? Like, can you please be the person who said that you're running our grant programs and that's why we can't give them the money anymore? Because they know, like, you guys know the answers. Like, you know the right place to do this. But there's a lot of these relationships that have been created for a long time, and it's hard because the scientists will call you and be like, we need more money. Like, but we think somebody else might have a better answer. So I think it's part of that collaboration. So we try to be that neutral party in which sometimes we even do directed funding. Somebody that they still want to go through us. We have the right notice of award. We have the right agreements that they are signed by an institution like the University of Pennsylvania. So even though they are directing this funding to a particular place, it still goes through us, just to have that middleman in the process.
So I think it's helpful if the clicker will work for me now. I just have to push really hard, I guess. There we go. I really do. We've been working together. Rachel and I were working together initially on a program. Oh, now
You hit too hard.
They'll fix it for me. I think they just did that for me. So Rachel and I were working together initially on this, and then we started working together with Debbie and the UPenn Orphan Disease Center in trying to figure out, like, well, what would a reproducible program look like? What would it look like if we were to work together with patient advocates and advocacy groups to help them to do this kind of work? First of all, what are the needs, right? So when I mentioned something about how what we'd like to do is landscape all the research that's been done in a particular condition and then compare that against what needs to be done. Well, what needs to be done? Right? Let's figure that out first. What are the needs? What are the categories of needs? Rachel and I, really mostly Rachel, did this initial work to kind of look at a number of different kind of research strategies that have been created, and to look across lots of them and to look at some examples of rare disease organizations that have done a really great job of shortening the time to get to a meaningful therapeutic trial. Right? And so what have they done, and what are those steps? And we know that they are going to vary a little bit from disease to disease, but some of them really come up time and time again. And so we ended up putting them into these 4 categories. And so the first one is disease biology characterization. Now, for a lot of you in this room, the disease that you or condition that you affiliate with might be something that is only known through genetic testing. So the identification of the causal gene is kind of duh, right? Like if your entire condition is defined by the gene, then that's done. But obviously that's not the case in every disorder. And sometimes there might be 1 or 2 of the genes that have been identified, but we know that there are others. But then what is the biological function of that gene? And that can be a big gap between 1 and 2, right? And then what are the effects of those different variants? And some of that we just need patient data to tell us. We just need to look at a lot of patient data to say, okay, here's what we see genetically versus here's what we see in the symptoms and in the severity of patients with those particular genetic variants. But sometimes it's also more than that. We've spent some time trying to understand how do we really get at reproducible models of understanding the functional consequence of genetic variants.
So to put
Yes.
that another way, maybe, I mean, this is what's so great about the RareX platform and getting that data. And so we've started to iterate. This isn't a one and done with any patient advocacy group. It's take the information you have today, let's see where we are, let's see where those gaps are. And then as we start to put more information into the data platform, then we can start to fill some of those gaps. But as Karmen said, this is tough. For many diseases, there are missense mutations or other mutations, and we don't know, is it gain of function, is it loss of function? What part of the population can we treat with a certain therapeutic? And so, taking a step back again, all of this is aimed at making meaningful medications that can help in the near term, in the nearest term that we possibly can. There's the point for academic basic research that is fantastic and serves its purpose, but this is really geared around how do we get to a medicine, and so that's what these 4 categories are really trying to address.
Yeah, and I think, so in this first one, we talk about disease biology and what we need to understand about disease biology. Maybe Debbie, you can talk a little bit about the way that your team really works with kind of the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, the real scientific researchers working on these conditions to get at
so the way, as I mentioned, that's what we start with a think tank. We do this. They used to be a lot longer. We used to do a day and a half. Now they just happen to be online, and we're trying to make it. I mean, it worked out really well with a shorter one recently, so maybe we don't need that much time together, but we make sure that we do bring the right people. And we do have presentations, and we pick the people that can explain it the best to the rest of the room. They're not patient-led meetings for that start of our process. We work with the scientists, and it's very interesting to hear the conversation. We invite Pharma. We make sure that Pharma is sitting in the room, and they are very open usually about what's going on and where the research is taking them. And that's where we start. We make sure that we hear from all sides, from clinicians. It's surprising how researchers don't know things that the clinicians do. And they've never talked to each other for some strange reason, and they're learning at that room. Oh, the patients do that? Really? Oh, I didn't know. You know the gene perfectly, but you don't know how the patient is reacting to this condition. So those kind of conversations are always very interesting. And based on those conversations, there's, in my experience and in everyone that we've done of these think tanks, things come out very clearly as the need, as the more immediate need. And they keep coming back. And then we have a lot of time on conversation after the presentations, and we do really think, and we sit around the table and we talk about what do you need, what should we be doing, what do you think you should do, or what can somebody else do for this? And these peaks of need, they just keep coming back. And that's usually what we go for then during the call for proposals.
Yeah, so one of the things that you called out there was, how important it is to get everybody to the same ground truth. And then once you have clinicians and the patient advocates and caregivers and industry on the same page of what those needs are, that's already a huge step forward, right?
Yep. So when we start to look into, I think, these next 2 categories, in the work that we've done together so far, in the few groups where we've been piloting this effort, when we start to look at therapeutic readiness and clinical trial readiness, I would say that this is where we get to a lot of gaps.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, why do we see so many of the gaps here, and what do you see as a progression of efforts that needs to be done?
Yeah, so this is something we talk about all the time in terms of, at least in terms of clinical trial readiness, scalability, and sort of, to invest. A lot of different disorders have unique causes, obviously, but they might have similar manifestations that could be measured by clinical endpoints that are the same or near to the same. And so that's one of the things, and maybe you can speak about the U of Colorado efforts for the basket natural history study. The therapeutic readiness, the druggable target, druggable, I think, is the key word there. We might know the genetic cause, but do we know how to drug it? That's obviously, the biggest factor that we have in some respects. And so, when people talk about precision medicine, and there are so many different therapeutic modalities or ways that you can make drugs these days, it's about helping point you to, is N-Lorem really going to work in this case? Or because of the variants that we know, or because we know if you push too much on one side or the other side, it's going to actually be detrimental. It's working through those factors. I think therapeutic window is another huge thing. What is realistic to expect in terms of reversal for different age groups? So, we want to be able to serve every patient that we can, but we also want to be realistic about what that cure might look like for someone who's 18 versus 2 months old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the last category, of course, patient population and engagement. I think, I've said before, why are we at Global Genes taking this work on? Like, what puts us in a good position to be doing this work side by side with patient advocacy organizations? And it's really particularly this last category. It's because this is a critical piece, right? So if you have these 4 pieces, this one is as important as the rest. That we need to understand the natural history of a condition before we can really approach treatment. We need to know where the patients are. We need to have patients and families really actively participating and involved. One of the things that we've learned along the way is that we really need this very last one here. We need a prioritized list of disease symptoms regarding their impact to quality of life. So we don't just want to know, well, here are the 20 symptoms that are experienced in this community, and here are the activities of daily living that are most impacted by this disease broadly. But what we need to know is, well, for this particular neurodevelopmental disorder, if the number one symptom that families in this community say that they need help with is intractable seizures, then we should be focusing efforts there. But in a very similar neurodevelopmental disorder with seizures, the community might tell us, actually, there's a drug that treats our seizures quite well. But like, our kids have these horrific migraines and miss school half the time, right? We need to know that. We need this prioritized list. And so that's something that we've really started incorporating in actually a very data-driven way. So we're going to be starting to collect that data in a very systematic way through our data collection platform. So Debbie, I don't know, maybe you want to talk a little bit about how, as we started working together, where you see the strengths and the weaknesses and how you think about that patient perspective.
I love that you started it with this question of what is the priority for the patients, because what was missing on our way of doing things was that we were very scientific driven. We are a research institution. We were very much thinking of what the scientists are saying that we should be doing, and even the clinicians in a way, right? But we were missing that part. And we when you and I started talking about this, and how good would it be if we brought all this information that we have, all this data that we have been collecting from the patients, and we put it together with the science. Like, how good would that be? And it actually has been great. So we started working on this research readiness program that is a union between MDBR and the RareX platform. And when we say that, is because we wanted to make sure that we had a purpose. So we call it a carrot, right? So we want scientists to be paying attention because we have some money to give to them. I mean, we need the money to do the research, and it's just never enough. But some groups are participated in the MDBR, and like I said, this is our
You have to tell them what the MDBR is.
Yeah, so $1 Million Bike Ride. It's an event that happens once a year in June. It's a bike ride that happens in Philadelphia. and teams. We had 35 this year, so every year we have between 30 and 35 teams that raise money for their disease. And we do a matching program that we match as much as $30,000 from what they raise. And then we put together a grant program from them. So there is a purpose to this program that we started together, because at the end of the day, whatever we decided were the gaps in the research were going to be funded by the money that we raised together through the $1 Million Bike Ride. But what was missing was this part of like, okay, this is needed for the science, but is this important for the patients? So through this data that you have been collecting, and that we actually increased it even while working with our patients in these pilot programs that we did this year, we figured that some things were more important. And then you match that with a think tank. And then we started this think tank, and then you mentioned it for the variants, right? That was the most important thing, this particular scientific point that they thought they were fine with. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think at the beginning it was just like mentioned lightly during the conversation, and then somebody, well, I don't agree with that. And it became like the center of the conversation. And it just kept coming back to this subject. And we decided that the patients and the science really needed to be funding this particular point. I mean, how wonderful the whole community decided where to put this $120,000 that they have raised.
Yeah, I don't expect all of our programs to be that clear, but it really was. Like at the end of this session, everybody was like, well, there it is. That's our grant.
That's easy.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, going back to, again, the fact that this is an iterative process, and, you know, I can't even imagine the burden of filling out all of these patient registries. I know it was mentioned in the session, 500 pages, and, it's starting to understand why that's important, and that's what we want to do with the research readiness, is link all of that together so you understand the purpose, but also so that the RareX platform can then adjust. So if we find out, okay, most patients are saying, actually, this is the quality of life symptom that's affecting us the most as a family, then we can dig deeper into that. Mm-hmm. And then we can start to learn things that the clinicians don't know because they just haven't seen enough patients to have that sort of emerge organically as it would in a more prevalent disease. So these things are all linked, and they're all very useful, and hopefully that gives you some motivation, to go through and answer all of those questions that seem annoying and time-consuming, but you really see the purpose for why we are asking those questions and how meaningful they can be, and how that leads us to the next steps of getting this closer to hopefully having a medicine that will transform lives.
I think that even applies to the scientists too. We don't want to overwhelm them either with need from their intake, and that we saw this with this program, that it was a lot of questions at the beginning that we were able to see maybe they don't need to answer the basic questions. If we already know, since we're looking at these 4 categories, yes, some of the disease biology characterization, we know some of the genetics, we know some of the uses of some drugs that haven't worked or have worked. Why do we want to ask the doctors, the scientists, the same thing? So I think we're learning. This is truly a question of learning from each experience, and every time we do it, I think it's going to be easier for both the patients and the researchers helping us.
And then once you have that in one place, if everybody could start to use it from one place, then you get rid of that repetition of filling it out in multiple places. And that's sort of the long-term goal, again, is coming up with this place for ground truth for diseases that we continue to build on over time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I will show, and then I want to make sure we leave some time. I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. But we've been piloting this work at Global Genes. We've been piloting this work this year with a couple of groups, and the organization decided to move forward into actually a research readiness grant for 2024. So that's exciting to me that we're going to continue to do this work. We're going to be able to do this probably with 5 different patient advocacy groups next year. in 2024. And so, you can see here kind of just an overview of the steps that we've been kind of talking through in terms of how we approach this. And it doesn't mean that Global Genes is the only place that can do this, or that, obviously not, because I've been talking about the way that UPenn does it. So there's some other groups that do it as well. But I think we would agree from the different perspectives that we've been involved with and programs that we're aware of, that there are certain steps to doing this, and that regardless of kind of what organization you work with, it's important to get that work done in some way, and not continue to put all of your hard-earned $5K dollars that you convinced your 10-year-old to do this 5K with you, and you put it toward research it's not going to push you forward as efficiently as you really can. Any other final thoughts before we let people just ask us their questions?
Just one, and that is, we know that there are consultants that you can hire to do this sort of work. Again, in this sort of spirit of equity, it shouldn't be based on how much money your organization or you as an individual have, how well your disease is studied. And so, this is of no cost to you, to your organization. And I think that's really critical as well, and again, is one of the reasons why I'm so invested in volunteering time in this, because I really do think it's a fundamental right that there is some equity across healthcare and across rare disease.
I will add to that, it's not just the money. If somebody promised you that they can do this in a couple of months, I would say think about it twice. This takes time. This takes time collecting data, talking to the right scientist, getting neutral information from the different parties. So just, if it comes quick and expensive, it's probably not the best thing that you can get. I mean, it's just because it's what it is, right? This is the nature of this particular project, is that they take time because there's so many steps that need to be looked at before you can decide where to put your money and what should be the next steps that you should be funding.
Yeah. Perfect. I think there's just a, kind of resources page. Questions? There's a lot of questions. Great. Shelby is in charge.
Hi, Chris Hopkins. Chris had a mention about the fact that, let's see. I lost my train of thought, sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Hi, I'm Orphan, CSO Pure Obesity Disease. So something I would like to address is, well, there are more and more organizations that have these 4 pillars developing their strategy and develop everything, and they are very happy, they are ready with their hub. They say, we de-risk everything, and we have our models, we have everything, we even can go from MTS to HTS and everything, and then they attract the industry and they want to go to their models, and they have a problem with the transfer office from the university where they develop their models. So the solution we had was to go to CROs to develop the models, but then when you ask to go through HTS, then it becomes $200,000, $800,000. So I think there is really an issue about with lawyers, in fact, that should be involved, so that we can, when we fund the creation of models, that we really have access to those models. And when we are ready to screen with those models, that we don't hear after 9 months of fighting with the transfer office, no, we are not going to give you access to the model you paid for.
I can just say quickly something about that. We, at least at the Orphan Disease Center, the grants that we've been putting together, we have a very strict notice of award, and we make anybody that's creating any kind of tool to be put in a public bank. So every mouse model that is created through one of our grants has to be a JAX. We require that if you make iPSCs, they go into Coriell. We are making sure that things do not stay at the university because of the same reason. And believe me, we do call our lawyers often and people, and even sharing data. And so that's one of the things that works by working with a third party from a neutral institution like us, is that our awards, our agreements are very strict. And we make sure that every dollar that you give, if it gives something that is tangible, it goes to a public place.
Mm-hmm.
Hey there. Thanks so much for this conversation. So my question really drives at the end of that 4-pillar spectrum for patient engagement specifically. And I think some of what I'm a huge fan of RAREX. I've been a big proponent of this model, but some of what I'm seeing in patient communities is real confusion about what RAREX is and how it differs from whatever registry they may have been participating in for a long time, or natural history study, or, So I think there's a need to do some education, because the patient advocacy organizations may have a much clearer understanding than the actual folks who they're serving. And so I guess I'm curious to know, is there a plan to either try and push out resources to support patient advocacy groups in educating in lay language, kind of how RAREX patient-reported, observer-reported is different than clinician-reported, and how, I guess, are you thinking about, in a culture in which we're all real freaked out about sharing our data and privacy considerations, overcoming some of just the barriers of understanding?
Yeah, I'll address a couple of those things without making this a big commercial for RAREX. Actually, I'm going to do the last one first. So this issue around concern about data privacy. We take data privacy very, very seriously. Our data privacy officer is looking right at me. Like, real seriously. It sometimes really makes me want to bang my head against the wall, but in a really good way. We're very, very careful about patient privacy. I will say that the vast majority, and I mean vast majority, of families with rare diseases that have high unmet need have less concern about that data privacy than we do, a lot less. So we do a lot to protect data. We do a lot to educate the communities that we work with about what we're doing. It is not their biggest concern, by and large, the vast majority. I mean, there are going to be outliers of people, but I'll say that. For us, philosophically at RAREX, we believe in the value of patient-reported data. I hope all of you will join me tomorrow morning as I get to announce the winners of our first Open Science Data Challenge, and hopefully I will convince you that patient-reported data is powerful. It's pretty exciting. We believe in it strongly, but we also believe that it has to be structured, and it has to be structured and aligned to research standards in a way that historically it has not been done. So that's really core to what we're doing. Yeah, you have a question. You're like, oh,
That wasn't really my question.
That wasn't your question. Well, but your question was in part about, like, how do we get that message out to the larger patient population?
Right, because I think that people are not getting the difference between, I don't want to name registry, people are not getting the difference between clinician-reported information that is gathered by a clinician.
You can call it by name, it's fine.
I just told her don't.
No.
Don't?
Right. You're right. Versus patient-reported and observer-reported outcomes that I am putting in, and how that's filling in the gaps. Some of what you're talking about, right? In terms of real quality of life metrics. I think people are filling out PRO surveys in the clinician experience, and they're like, why am I doing this again? And how is this different? So that's the area that I'm just curious if there's like planned education around, because in several communities that I work in, there is confusion.
This is such a big question. I don't want to take up all the rest of our time, because I could answering this in a detailed way. I think you actually asked 3 questions in one, kind of. It's okay. I think, number one, we have lots of conversations with the patient advocacy groups that we work with. You're right that those are mostly the patient advocacy group leaders initially, but actually we do a lot of work side by side with the patient advocacy group leaders to develop the kind of education, outreach to the larger community of individuals affected by that condition. So like on a condition by condition level, we do a lot of this kind of work of outreach and education. You know, it's true, we're not out there like big and bold advertising everything we do on Facebook to everyone affected with any rare disease or even in a targeted way. That's really not our approach. Our approach is like to develop strong collaborations with a particular patient advocacy group, or ideally a group of collaborating patient advocacy groups all focused on the same disease globally. Right? We have multiple examples of this where we have 3, 4, 5 different patient advocacy groups globally, all focused on the same disease, all working together to do this work together, which is a global platform that we can do. I don't see that changing. I don't think we're going to start doing a whole bunch of like direct-to-consumer type marketing. But as more data comes out, and I think following our Open Science Data Challenge, it is incumbent upon us as an organization to get some of this out there and to publish it. You know, we are increasingly seeing, and not just us, some others as well, that patient-reported data is really critical in this whole metric, and is genuinely powerful. And you know, I'll tell you all, I was sitting in a think tank style meeting last week for 2 straight days in DC, right next to Wiley Chambers, who works within the FDA and personally reviews applications. And he was telling me that the FDA believes in patient-reported data. They want to see more patient-reported data, and they need to see it side by side with some objective measures because they want to use it as outcome measures, but they need biomarker data side by side with it. So it's a piece of the puzzle, it's not the whole puzzle. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think
Luke.
that's a pretty, I don't know if it's on, I have a pretty loud voice, so it doesn't need to be, but I think that's a pretty colloquial answer to that, right? That can, which is why we're all here. But I have 2 questions. They won't be too long, I promise. The first is for Rachel, right? So slide 1 kind of looks like every function in biotech. From BD to preclinical to clinical development to clinical operations and beyond, right? So my question to you is, outside of manufacturing and CMC and a few other things, what is biotech's role if we're giving this all to them?
It's a great question. I think that everybody knows the steps to some degree. There's so much detail under each of those, and when you think about how long it takes to make a drug, the reason that we look at things before we even start a project all the way through the clinical developability is because if you don't have that plan, you're going to run into a problem. So, for example, if you don't know what your clinical trial is going to look like and what age group you're going to go into, you're not going to do your tox studies right. If you don't understand the dosing, you're not going to do the right length for the tox studies. So all of those pieces go together, and that's why it's so critically important that you have that whole view of, from the basic biology all the way through to the clinical endpoints, what the program's going to look like. Because best case scenario, it's many, many, many years. And if you make a misstep, you're adding all of that time back on. And so that well-oiled machine that is pharma and biotech needs to do a better job of using that knowledge in the rare disease space. So you can have the one-offs, you can have the Tim Hughes who are fantastic and doing the N of ones, but that's not going to solve the whole problem, right?
So it's a matter of industrializing this really well thought out model. So if it's executed, then we just need to figure out a way to get it industrialized, be it the CRO, biotech, whoever, right?
Right, and that brings up the CRO question again, and that's why this is difficult, because as I mentioned, there's not a one size fits all, because not everybody does need an animal model. There are many diseases where you don't need an animal model, or the animal model isn't helping you at all anyway. So it's putting all of that into perspective.
Thanks. The answer. My second question, if it's okay, is to Deb, is how do you direct new advocates with their funds that we come to with lemonade stands, and all the money that we try to raise? How do you make it, how do you point them to clinically relevant research rather than just going into, at least this is what we did when we first were diagnosed, is you just Google PubMed and find any PI and
Yes.
give them money, right? But how do you make sure that it's actually translational researchers that you're directing them towards?
So we do it through the large programs that I mentioned before, the RIDE and the big Jumpstart programs, but we also offer assistance at every level of the research grant program. And so when people come to me and I said, this happened 2 days ago, I have $60,000. What do I do with this? So we want to make sure that we talk to them and find out what they think is important. And then we do look either internally within Penn or outside. We actually are global. And we do find the right scientists and we have the discussions. We can go as far as do as a big think tank. We can do just a 2-hour meeting with the right scientists, and we do look at what has been done so far. So we do a very global. I wouldn't say that I just look at a foundation and give them an answer, because it's not that easy. It takes work. We talk to scientists. We make sure that everybody has their input, and that's so we do sign for a time together.
And can I add something you guys do that I think is important? Is they also they have a structured RFP process, right? So you don't just say, okay, we've defined the biggest need, and like Debbie, happen to know this one researcher who is good at that. No. They put out a structured RFP process, and they can manage that process so that it's not on you to figure out how to start an RFP process.
Yeah, we do everything online. We work with something called Submittable, through which the people who are going to apply get to actually do this in a formal way, and they can turn in their applications the right way. We also find reviewers who are going to review the grants blindly. So this is a whole blind review process, NIH style, for even if it's just for $30,000. We have 3 to 4 reviewers looking at your grant, giving blind reviews. We then look at those, and then internally with our experts decide if is this right. We actually look at the reviews and be like, well, this person was obviously biased or didn't understand what was going on. Why was it the outline? So yeah, we go through a whole process for every little money that we give away. We just don't hand money out.
Yeah, and this is also vetted through the Scientific Advisory Board at RARE Global Genes. So.
Yeah, we do. I know we're over time, and Shelby is looking at us.